So a day of great joy and whimsy. It is always a gift to be playful in community, to be creative. Always such a fun day. I'm not sure if it was before pandemic or after that we decided to move this blessing of the costumes to be a part of our Sunday morning worship, but I'm so glad that we did. It is delightful and it is good for us to delight together as part of our principal gathering and time of worship. So later in this service, we will bless our costumes. Whether you are wearing them or not, we will offer the joy that they bring to God and ask that God continue to celebrate and bless that joy and creativity. Before Father Cal offers that prayer of blessing, we have a little call and response that we will say. We're going to practice it now. We've said it for a couple of years, and I think we're getting pretty good at it, but more practice never hurts. So your part is, and yes, if you'd like to turn and see it in the bulletin, it's right on maybe the last page or next to last page. Page 18. There we go. So your part is, good Lord, deliver us. Good Lord, deliver us. And this is what we'll say first. From ghoulies and ghosties and long-legged beasties and things that go bump in the night. Okay, a couple more times. From ghoulies and ghosties and long-legged beasties and things that go bump in the night. From ghoulies and ghosties and long-legged beasties and things that go bump in the night. Excellent job. Excellent job. We'll definitely be ready when we get there. So I wonder about your memories of ghoulies and ghosties and long-legged beasties and things that go bump in the night. What consumed your young imagination at bedtime? What ghoulie and ghosty did your parents need to check for in the closet just one more time? What long-legged beastie did you need extra assurance was not lurking under your bed? For younger me, there was a film that informed my imagination of things that go bump in the night. Perhaps a film for you too. For me, this film is a classic, and I'm sure when we watched it as a family, that my parents had a different idea about the impression it would continue to hold on me. Because this film is not a horror film. I actually went and looked to be sure, and it's classified under drama and sci-fi. There are really heartwarming parts of this film. There are funny parts of this film. There's even a young Drew Barrymore in this film. There's connection and friendship, sacrifice even. So much of this film would preach. Love your neighbor. Yes, even your extraterrestrial neighbor. But to 7 or 8-year-old me, the thought of E.T. showing up in my backyard and living in my home was terrifying. Sweet E.T., who loved Elliot and just wanted to phone home. He was my ghoulie and ghosty, my long-legged beastie, and I was convinced that every bump in the night announced his arrival. Closet checks were particularly important. If you remember, E.T. was quite adept at hiding in the closet, making it seem like he was one of the stuffed animals. You can't just look, I'd say to my parents, you have to move things around. He knows how to blend in. My parents were so happy we had watched this movie. My sister still gives me grief to this day. She and I are 4 years apart, so I'm just older enough that at 8, I could manage to carry her 4-year-old self to my bed. Because even as she slumbered, just the presence of her beside me helped to dispel the ET ghoulies and ghosties. I would finally fall asleep, and she would awake in the morning furious that I had moved her. This practice continued for far longer than I might like to admit. It started when we were 8 and 4, but ET continued to consume my imagination at bedtime, approaching double digits. From ghoulies and ghosties and long-legged beasties and things that go bump in the night. So I hinted at our gospel lesson a few moments ago. Love your neighbor, even your extraterrestrial neighbor. At first glance or first hearing, this seems today a not so scary gospel reading. The Pharisees are testing Jesus again. God bless them. They are persistent, kind of like biblical gnats. They keep buzzing around. They just won't go away. But at this point, we're familiar with the interactions between the Pharisees and Jesus. We know that Jesus is up to the challenge, and that he will respond to the Pharisees in a way that amazes, in a way that confounds. And this interaction is no different, even as the Pharisees choose a lawyer from among them to question Jesus. "Teacher," the lawyer asks, "which commandment in the law is the greatest?" Jesus is immediate in his answer. He knows the scriptures. He quotes from Deuteronomy and Leviticus. He shares what the Pharisees know to be true. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the greatest and first commandment. And a second, Jesus says, is like unto it, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. And there it is. The encapsulation of God's commandments. Love God, love your neighbor as yourself. These two things are God's greatest call and desire for God's beloved, for us. Love God, love your neighbor. Again, seemingly a not so scary gospel reading. Here in the Gospel of Matthew, the Pharisees have no response. Jesus, in fact, goes on to ask them a question. This same story, this same interaction, which commandment in the law is the greatest, is also shared in the Gospel of Mark and in the Gospel of Luke. This underscores the significance of Jesus' response. This is important stuff. This is the stuff. And so Matthew, Mark, and Luke all choose to tell this story. Mark's telling is pretty close to Matthew's, but in Luke's telling, the lawyer questioning Jesus would like to know more. This is a story that is close to the heart of our community. Luke chapter 10. Love God, love your neighbor. And what does the lawyer want to know? He wants Jesus to define some terms. And who is my neighbor? The lawyer asks. Jesus responds with the story of the Good Samaritan. Jesus defines neighbor as beyond any boundary that we might imagine or impose. There is no one who is not your neighbor. Love God, love your neighbor. It's starting to feel a bit heavier. Good Lord, deliver me from those commands. Because they are hard. And yes, they can be scary. There is so much unknown and unpredictable when we choose to follow the way of love. And it is a choice. When Jesus shares God's commands to love God and love your neighbor, Jesus is not speaking of love as an emotion or a feeling. Feelings and emotions cannot be commanded. They can perhaps be desired. I wish that you experienced feelings of warmth towards me. But Jesus is not expressing a desire. I sure hope you feel love toward God and toward your neighbor. Jesus is commanding an action. Be loyal to God. Be devoted to your neighbor. Loyalty and devotion are a daily choice. They take discipline, practice, and effort. Love God, love my neighbor, love God, love my neighbor, love God, love my neighbor over and over again. Trying, failing, trying again. Love of God, love of neighbor, love of God, love of neighbor. We do not commit ourselves to active, disciplined, daily love like this and remain unchanged. And that's scary. And it's also our greatest hope. Transformation, change of ourselves and all of creation through the love of God and the love of neighbor. It is our greatest hope. We are holding so many stories right now of pain and trauma and terror. Our love of violence, revenge, and hatred seem to overwhelm. We love them. And there are too many stories of too many children with too many real nightmares. From Maine to Israel to Palestine to right here in our own community, how do we respond? What is the faithful way forward? Where is our hope? Jesus says, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind, and you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Love of God, love of neighbor, love of God, love of neighbor, active, moving, transforming over and over again. Love of God, love of neighbor, love of God, love of neighbor today, tomorrow, until all of creation is transformed by the love that we follow. Good Lord, by your love and by our practice, discipline, and action in your love, deliver us.